Good morning and welcome back to Dravin's Den. I'm your host, Stan. If this is the first time you're listening, this is the show where we slow history down, stretch it out, and remind ourselves that the past wasn't lived in neat chapters. It was messy, it was uncertain, and most of the time, people had no idea what kind of moment they were stepping in. Today's episode is a combined end of the week roundup covering January 6th through January 9th. 4 days of history, a handful of cultural pivots, and at least one reminder that humanity has always been improvising. January has a strange energy. The holidays are over, the noise has dropped, and suddenly the world expects productivity, clarity, and emotional stability like none of that chaos just happened. History is very clear on this. That expectation has never worked. So let's take a breath and ease right on into it. January 6th. It carries symbolic weight long before modern headlines ever touched it. On January 6th, many cultures observed the Feast of the Epiphany, marking the moment when the Magi arrived to see the Christ child. At its core, Epiphany isn't about the journey. It's about recognition. The moment when something hidden becomes undeniable. That idea shaped centuries of tradition. In parts of Europe, Epiphany was actually considered more important than Christmas. Gifts were exchanged. Kings were symbolically crowned. In Spain and parts of Latin America, children still received gifts on January 6th rather than January 25th. There's also the tradition of king cake, where a small token is hidden inside. Whoever finds it is chosen, sometimes crowned, sometimes obligated to host the next gathering. A reminder that revelation often comes with responsibility. Historically, Epiphany represents the uncomfortable moment when the truth steps forward and says, "You can't ignore me anymore." That symbolism echoes strongly in secular history as well. On January 6, 1912, New Mexico became the 47th U.S. state after decades of territorial limbo. It wasn't denied because it lacked people or resources. It was delayed because recognition requires agreement, and agreement takes time. Modern January 6th history reminds us of something else. Democracy is not automatic. It's maintained, challenged, and occasionally strained in moments when people are forced to confront what they actually believe about power and legitimacy. History doesn't always reveal itself gently. Sometimes it shows up uninvited. If you want to know more about all that, you can find your sources at the Library of Congress, National Archives, and Historical Religious Scholarship. January 7th brings us one of the moments where the future quietly arrives without asking permission. On January 7th, 1927, the first transatlantic telephone call was completed between New York and London. It was very ceremonial, heavily monitored, and reportedly very awkward. The sound quality was poor, the delay noticeable, but none of that mattered. For the first time, voices crossed the ocean instantly. Newspapers immediately warned that the world was shrinking too fast, that privacy would vanish, that people would lose patience and depth. If that sounds familiar, it should. Every major leap in communication is met with the same fear, that connection will somehow undo us. And yet, history keeps choosing connection anyway. January 7th is also the birthday of Nicolas Cage, one of my favorite actors, comparable to William Shatner, if you ask me. It feels like the universe balancing innovation with unpredictability. And if you ever wondered whether Nicolas Cage is aware of the chaos he radiates, oh, he absolutely is. In the early 2000s, Cage once spent over $150,000 on a pet octopus because he believed it would help him with acting. Not metaphorically, literally. He said observing its movements would improve his emotional range. This is the same man who purchased a haunted mansion, a dinosaur skull, and allegedly once tried to convince his agent he could play every character in a movie simultaneously. History books won't mention this, but they probably should. Civilization progresses because some people color inside the lines, and some people buy octopuses for inspiration. Oh, and on equally important, if not more so, my middle son was born on January 7th as well. January 8th is a cultural doubleheader. January 8th, 1935, Elvis Presley was born in Toledo, Mississippi. He arrived with a shadow. His twin brother was stillborn, and that loss followed him throughout his life. Elvis didn't invent rock and roll, but he embodied it in a way that frightened authority. His performances were called obscene. His music was dismissed as dangerous. Parents wrote letters. Preachers warned congregations. Teenagers listened anyway. Well, we did what we want. Elvis changed not just music, but posture, confidence, permission. He made emotion physical. He also made deeply questionable food choices with unmatched commitment. January 8th is also David Bowie's birthday. So we go from hip swinging to David Bowie. I think David Bowie is like a classification all of himself. But it feels intentional on history's part. Two men, born the same day, reshaping culture in completely different ways. One challenged norms through raw presence, the other through reinvention. Culture moves when people stop asking whether they're allowed to exist as they are. And to learn more about those, you can look at the Smithsonian Magazine, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame archives, and biographical records. January 8th is also my daughter's birthday. Put that in there. Yeah, she just turned the ripe old age of 30. Born during the blizzard of 1996. Oof. Yeah, she had a rough coming in. January 9th reminds us that history often punishes voices before it praises them. On January 9, 1431, Joan of Arc's trial began. She was 19, uneducated, and accused of crimes that were political at their core. Her trial wasn't about truth. It was about control. She would be executed. Decades later, the verdict would be overturned. Centuries later, she would be canonized. History is slow to admit mistakes. January 9th also marks the legacy of Anna Zinger, who continued publishing her husband's newspaper after he was jailed for criticizing government officials. She didn't ask permission. She printed anyway. Freedom of the press didn't arrive politely. It arrived stubbornly. January wants to be serious. History refuses. Here's some funny and strange January history. On January of 1919, the Great Molasses Flood left Boston smelling like sugar for decades after a massive storage tank burst. People drowned in syrup. Buildings collapsed. In January 1961, a B-52 bomber accidentally dropped 2 nuclear bombs over North Carolina. They didn't detonate because one safety switch held. One switch. Sleep tight. And on January 1977, Americans lined up to buy pet rocks. No maintenance, no feeding, just vibes. Before we close out, I want to tell you about Lore Trail. Lore Trail is a GPS-based history discovery app that shows you historical events tied to where you're standing. Not just major landmarks, but forgotten stories, overlooked moments, and local history that disappears quietly if no one listens. The Lore Trail Kickstarter app, or Kickstarter, is live at kickstarter.com/projects/Lore Trail. Supporting it helps preserve history, preserve stories before they fade. The app is currently in beta testing, and with your support, we can bring it up to real time and share it with the world and reconnect family with history. If your family has a story, a journey, a survival moment, a tradition that doesn't make sense unless you lived it, I want to hear it. Email those stories to dravinsden@gmail.com. You don't have to write it perfectly. History never arrives polished. January doesn't ask permission. It just keeps going. If you're still finding your footing, that's not failure. That's continuity. History has always been built by people figuring it out in real time. You're on schedule. This has been Dravin's Den, and we'll do it next time.